Everyone to our work session tonight. We have a very important budget that will draw a lot of attention, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to present, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and as always, I'll be joined by our Budget Director, Jonathan Hobbs. He and his team have done an excellent job presenting and preparing this year's budget. And so what we'd like to do is go through talking a little bit about how we come to make the choices that we're recommending during the budget process. We'll talk a little bit about the process itself. Ultimately, as we say every year, the purpose of the budget is to achieve council's desired outcomes. We'll go through the numbers a little bit, some of the things we've done to right-size the budget, and this is a continuation of things we've started several years ago, some of the options and for council's consideration, and then go through next steps. One thing I want to reiterate, I'll say it now, but I'll reiterate hopefully later in the presentation, is this is an early step in what's a long process that'll play out over the next month or so. So we're going to present a lot of information tonight, and to some extent I know it can be an overwhelming amount of information, but we want to make sure we're also being transparent. So in so much as people really want to dig through the numbers, we want to make sure that we're straddling that line of providing you with all the information you need to help set the stage to make choices, and also not overwhelming you with too much information. As the mayor alluded to, very difficult choices this year, because one of the things we're talking about is enhanced public safety. We're a very safe community today. As council heard in your retreat and at your work session last week, we have some critical unmet needs in public safety. So we really want to talk to you about the budget itself, talk to you a little bit about those needs, and then today we'll leave you with some options for consideration. But at the next work session, we really want to roll up our sleeves and go through a priority list of some of those unfunded needs, and then some of the council's revenue options or cost-cutting options to give you opportunities to be able to address those needs in a variety of different ways. So as always, we start with the city's vision. I won't read this slide, but it's all about making Chesapeake an exceptional place to live, learn, work, farm, and play, and how every year, how do we make progress towards that goal. From a decision-making criteria, you've seen this a lot. We have three basic principles that we as staff make all of our decisions based on. Everything we do is designed to help make Chesapeake an exceptional place to live, learn, work, farm, and play, provide outstanding service to council, our community, our customers, and each other, and ultimately being fiscally responsible and sustainable. So we'll talk a little bit, as we always do, about our budget guiding principles. Those are really unique factors that Chesapeake City Council has identified to make sure that we stay a really fiscally strong organization and a fiscally strong community. In terms of desired outcomes, you've seen this a lot before. Council's desired outcomes, and this forms the backbone of our strategic plan, is economic prosperity, connectivity, cultural diversity, environmental responsibility, safety and security. As you'll recall, at your retreat in January, we had an opportunity to revisit these. Council reaffirmed these as our desired outcomes, but you did ask us to make some tweaks to the objectives that we're trying to achieve, and so I'm going to quickly highlight some of these because they drive some of the recommendations in the budget. Council asked us to not just maintain but also enhance the city's open for business philosophy. And this really goes to making sure that we're strong in job growth, strong in wage growth, strong in tax base growth and job creation. Dr. King brought up the notion we've had for several years, the notion of reducing gun violence in the community, but we also want to pay attention to our overall crime rates. We've actually had some uptick in property crimes, and so we want to make sure that we're taking a look at the global overall crime rate. And then Councilmember Ritters and others have talked about partnering with other organizations. This isn't just the city government. It's not just the police department. It's partnering with the faith-based community and other organizations to make sure that the entire city and all of our partners are aligned to achieve these outcomes. Protecting, enhancing our water resources and public utility infrastructure. As we were having that retreat in January, Council will recall that the city of Richmond was dealing with catastrophic water issues. largely due to their aging water infrastructure. And we have some of those similar challenges here within the city of Chesapeake. So during this budget process, you'll get some information about where we are today on our utility infrastructure and where we need to be in the future. And then finally, the notion of improving the city's overall environmental health. So we talked about our conservation programs, our preservation programs, but also some things that haven't historically been included as metrics in the budget, like animal welfare. And so you're going to see some things, particularly with our animal shelter, things to really improve the animal welfare within the community. This is just a graphic that we use to keep our entire team and the community aligned about what it is we're trying to achieve and how it all works together. So I want to get a little bit into the budget framework. I mentioned this a little bit last week, but I just want to be clear for council and for the community. We have delivered a core budget at our existing tax rate that can accomplish and maintain our existing services that we're providing today, and address some of the public safety needs, including the number one public safety need, which is getting our fire apparatus adequately staffed, right? So the core budget, and our budget director, Jonathan Hobbs, coined the term continue operations, right size everything. That's really been our practice for a few years, but we really leaned into it every year because I always want to give you an option at our existing, with our existing revenues, how can we make that budget happen? But as council has seen both at the retreat and at your work session last week, there's very, very significant public safety needs in the community that are way beyond our capacity to address within our existing resources. And so that will either require some additional revenue or cuts to programs and services, or some combination of the two. And so we'll walk you through some of the choices that we'll be considering during the budget process. I want to start here with council's budget guiding principles. So generally speaking, city managers in Virginia are free to propose a budget at any tax rate or any resource rate that's necessary to accomplish the things that are contained within that budget. Here in Chesapeake, council has adopted budget guiding principles, which are sort of the guardrails around that policy flexibility. And so those guiding principles, number one, we have no increase in the real estate tax rate. And as I mentioned, the core budget maintains the current tax rate of $1 per $100 of assessed valuation. Budget guiding principle 2 is do not add new fees. There are no new fees included in this budget. Guiding principle number 3, we don't supplant losses in state or federal funds with local funds. This budget does not supplant any losses in state or federal funds. I'm getting asked this question a lot, as are people all around the Commonwealth, about potential impacts about federal budget cuts on grant programs and services. So we monitor all of our grants. I've sent you some information previously, as grant funds are received. We will continue to monitor, but as of this moment, there's no impact to the city. But if we were to have a reduction in grant funding, we will bring you all options and choices to be able to purposefully address any potential losses. And then budget guiding principle number 4, we only deviate from the first 3 principles when addressing a council identified strategic priority. So we have advertised a 2-cent real estate tax increase to be specifically dedicated for enhanced public safety services. We're not presuming that is ultimately what will be adopted, but again, another quirk of Virginia law, if I don't advertise an increase in the real estate tax rate, I'm taking that choice away from you, because you can't raise the advertised real estate tax rate. You can only lower it. So we've advertised a 2-cent tax increase to give you the capacity to make those choices, whatever choices you choose to make. So as far as city council guidance on the budget, we obviously take guidance all year round. As you'll see, we keep a running list of things council and the community has asked us to consider. We really started this work at council's retreat in January. We, of course, had an enhanced public safety work session last week, and tonight, of course, is the formal budget presentation. We do have some assumptions that we make when we set out to create the budget. Assumptions being we're trying to maintain existing levels of service, and we're trying to maintain the high quality of life and high levels of citizen satisfaction that we have in the city. We really want to maintain the lowest tax and fee burden in the region, and that's something that we've done for several years now, but we want to continue to do that. And then this year, we're trying to help you find a way to address unfunded public safety needs. So that's really been a lot of the work that's gone into this particular budget. I want to start here with you. I think you've all probably seen the Old Dominion University's Life in Hampton Roads survey. It's an annual quality of life survey that they do for all the cities here in Hampton Roads. Chesapeake consistently has the highest citizen satisfaction of any city in the region. That margin has actually increased over time, and we have particularly high ratings for public safety, particularly high citizen satisfaction with public safety. I highlight that because even though we are asking for additional resources for public safety, I don't want the community to think we're unsafe. Right, we are a very, very safe community. We have an outstanding team, and they do great things. But they have brought needs to our attention, and so this process allows us the opportunity to try to address some of those needs to make us even better in the future. And then, of course, we maintain this very, very high level of citizen satisfaction with the lowest tax and fee burden in the region. This is the chart that we show you annually, which is the different tax and fee comparison across the region. You can see in most instances on every major tax or fee, we're either the lowest or among the lowest. I'll draw your attention to the right-hand side of this ledger. These are the taxes that form the majority of our local revenues: real estate and personal property. I'll actually draw your attention to the last three. So solid waste, real estate, and personal property. So we get the question all the time, what could we do to have the lowest real estate, tax rate, the lowest personal property tax rate, that we're second in both of those categories. On meals tax, we're second, but actually Virginia Beach is proposing an increase that would tie us there. But we're lowest in most of these tax and fee. The reason that we don't have the lowest real estate or personal property tax is because of the third line from the right. We have no solid waste fee. So $22 million a year is the approximate is the revenue we could generate from the lowest fee in the region, which would be Suffolk. So if we impose Suffolk's fee on solid waste, that would be the lowest fee in the region. We would generate about $22 million, and by doing that, we would have the lowest real estate tax rate and the lowest personal property tax rate in the entire region. And so it's not a choice I'm asking you to make this year, but as we move to the single bin solution in the future, if that's the choice we make, it might be an opportunity to revisit that so people can really clearly see transparent what's the cost of their total solid waste program, including what would be an enhanced curbside recycling program by moving to the single bin solution, and then also how did we achieve the lowest real estate taxes and the lowest personal property tax in the region. The next slide really tells the story. Even at the increased tax rate that's being advertised, we would still have the lowest tax and fee burden in the entire region. And the thing that's unique about this slide is the Chesapeake number is based on the proposed advertised tax rate. The other cities' numbers are based on the existing tax rates, and as you may know, each of the cities is considering tax and fee increases of their own, whether it's meals tax, stormwater, solid waste, real estate, and others. So we expect that regardless of what choice council makes, we will maintain the lowest tax and fee burden of any city here within the region. Now, I mentioned that we keep a running list throughout the year of things council's asked us to consider in the upcoming budget. This next slide encapsulates several of those items. So Councilmember Whitaker brought up the notion, we've talked about this a little bit, about redevelopment in the Compostela area. So we're building a pool there. We have areas in that particular neighborhood that have had way over the city the average in terms of crime rate. We have a need for affordable housing in the community. So we've talked about whether we could partner with a redevelopment and housing authority, land bank authority, and others to possibly consider some redevelopment potential in the Campostella area. Great Bridge Battlefield and Waterways Museum. Council will recall you signed a new lease with the museum last year. We told you at that time that the expectations from the city in that lease are probably beyond what the museum can afford, so you likely would see a request in the budget for operating assistance. The museum has also requested capital facility assistance in terms of building out the remainder of that facility with classroom space and additional meeting space to be able to enhance programming, provide additional tourism opportunities, and generate additional revenue. Summer Nights Youth Program, I had a chance to talk to the mayor and Councilmember Newens and Councilmember Dyer in Virginia Beach about some of the things that they've done in the beach to address youth violence. One of the things was standing up a Summer Nights Youth Program, a basketball program. They've had some successes, but they did give us some guidance on things if they had to do differently, things they would do differently. So if that was something that council wanted to consider, it's certainly a program we could bring forward. And then I had an opportunity to discuss with Councilmember Smith something that he brought up at the retreat. It's a summer work program for youth, something that we used to have in the city several years ago, where we're really bringing on youth within the city to help out with some of the core needs, whether they be in landscaping, maintenance. We'll have lifeguard opportunities here coming up soon, other things to do to both keep youth active and engaged and also provide a little bit of income over the summer. So those were some of the things we cataloged during the year. The only one we were able to address in the core budget is the operating assistance to Great Bridge Battlefields and Waterways Museum. Now, as always, we leave council capacity on the bottom line in the budget were you to choose to advance any of these initiatives or any other initiative that you want to do, or whether use that capacity to help reduce the tax rate. Okay, so that is the same this year. We have some capacity on the bottom line for council to make either these choices or other choices. This is the list that the main list that we keep a running tab of every year about high priority projects that council's identified that are either fully programmed or funded. You can see those here. Partially programmed or funded, and you can see those here. And then priority projects that are minimally funded or unfunded. The lion's share of the money on the minimally funded or unfunded really is in two projects. It is in the Centerville Turnpike Bridge replacement, and council about a year ago had a work session on that project. That one capital project is upwards of $3 million, 300. I wish it was $3 million, $300 million. And likewise, a convocation center and performing arts center, similar. You had a work session on that a little over a year ago, and it's also about $300 million. And you can see the other requests there that are either minimally funded or unfunded. And now I'll move into the process itself. So council has seen this many times over the years. Every single year we go through an exercise we call stop, start, continue. And this is our chance to right-size the budget every single year. So an agency doesn't start with the resources that they have in the existing year and plan for growth. They actually have to take a budget reduction and then ask for that reduction back, or ask for something different, and we make those choices before we even consider any new request. And so every single year, we're eliminating some programs, some services, reallocating staff resources, because there are things that are either no longer achieving positive outcomes, or they may have had a constituency when the program or service started that no longer exists today, or there might be something in their business line that's more important that they'd like to stop doing something that they're doing today and start something new in its place. And so that really, really helps us. This is really one of the key tools that we have to make sure that we maintain a high quality of life at the lowest tax and fee burden in the entire region. In addition, this year, because we are asking for you to consider enhanced public safety over and above the core budget, we've really leaned into the notion of right-sizing everything. We started that a few years ago, and I'm going to touch on that in a moment, but we've really leaned into it this year. So council will recall a few years ago, during the pandemic, we had to make really, really dramatic cuts to the budget. So my very first budget that I presented to you before the ink was dry, we actually had to cut $22 million because we didn't know what the pandemic would hold. And then in the following budget, we cut $47 million. So we did a lot of right sizing then, and we haven't added that capacity back into the budget in many ways. In addition, during that time where we were making dramatic budget cuts, we were fully funding the city's pay plan, particularly the public safety pay plan. And so we made a series of choices in the budget that allowed us to fund the public safety pay plan, and it ultimately provided capacity for council to reduce the tax rate a few years ago. And I'm not sure how well the community knows that the council reduced the tax rate a few years ago, but it was a pretty dramatic reduction, one of the largest that we've had certainly in a long time. So that just to revisit this, the things that we did at that time and we've continued today, we eliminated or redirected vacant positions. We redirected money from the city's lockbox, which is how we fund capital projects. We redirected those funds to the operating budget. Now, subsequent to that, we have put that money back into the capital budget. We increased the meals tax by 0.5%. We increased the automobile license fee. Still, we're the lowest fee in the region, but we did make that choice. We retained the entire TIF surplus in years where we declare a TIF surplus. We canceled the curbside recycling contract. We reduced subsidies to constitutional officers and state agencies. We delayed or canceled several capital improvement projects, and then we benchmark and monitor fees within the region or within an industry to make sure that we're achieving as close as we can to cost recovery. So that right sizing continues this year. We're reallocating or eliminating vacant positions in several departments, including Parks, Rec, and Tourism, Central Fleet, and Audit Services. We're proposing to redirect 0.5% of the meals tax revenue to the city lockbox. Jonathan will talk to you a little bit about that, and we have a proposal to replace some of the lost revenue. We're transitioning to a hybrid staffing model, meaning using staff and contract services to try to improve service delivery and reduce costs. We're doing that in audit services, housekeeping, juvenile detention, medical services, and other places, but we just wanted to highlight a few. There are some projects that are no longer fully funded, so we've either had to continue to cancel or delay projects in the CIP. Some of those include South Central Water and Sewer Transmission Line and George Washington Highway widening project, and a new data center campus that we were proposing here. This is for the city services, for our servers here, and we transferred those funds to facility maintenance. So those are a few of the things that we stopped doing. You can see at the end of the budget document itself a list of unfunded operating and capital projects. So these were requests by either city departments or agencies, constitutional officers, or other partners for projects that aren't funded in the budget. But those were just a highlight of some of the few. Now, what did we start doing? This is the first thing on this list is one of the things that we highlighted last week in the public safety presentation. Full funding for early detection of health conditions that disproportionately impact firefighters. I think we all know that it's a very hazardous duty. They get exposed to a lot of carcinogens, and so we had a very successful pilot program in the fire department with advanced health screenings, and we'd like to continue that pilot program. The next is we're making a lot of technology improvements and other evaluation and performance improvements, really to make sure that we stay a resourceful organization. It's one of the hallmarks of Chesapeake is the notion of doing more with less, and our team members really embrace that, and they lean into that. It's something we reward and recognize, and we want to continue to do to give them the tools, including data and analytics, to make good choices. And then expanding recreational opportunities. one of the examples is we'll begin as we do the ribbon cutting and start construction of the Cuffy Pool. We need to begin adding capacity to staff that facility up as it opens. Another thing we continued doing, maintaining pay competitiveness. So when we did the pay plan several years ago, council will recall of the 7 cities, we had fallen to number 6 in pay and benefits. And so our council's adopted policy is to be in the top 3 in pay and benefits. And so we're fully funding the pay plan to be able to do that. Public safety and general workforce are on different pay plans, but we have both of those plans fully funded. Maintaining programs and services. In the core budget, we're not proposing any significant reductions to existing programs or services. And then we continue to monitor all of our fee rates to ensure either cost recovery or regional competitiveness or both. And so you can see a list of some of the fee adjustments we are making. The most significant is probably a proposed increase to the hotel lodging flat tax, increasing that rate from $1 to $2 per room night. I'll show you that on a chart here. Sheriff's Office. So this is the comparison of that lodging flat tax increase. You can see that we're on the very low end of this scale. We propose bringing this up similar to Virginia Beach and Hampton. We have very, very strong hotel industry here in Chesapeake. We actually benefit largely from a lot of the sports tourism activities that takes place in Virginia Beach. We'd like to continue to enhance our own tourism program, and so the revenues here will help support the conference center and some of our other tourism programs that we have, which will then in turn generate additional room nights and revenues for the hotels. I do want to address a deviation from what we called option 2. If you remember, council had directed us to try wherever we can to reduce subsidies to constitutional officers and state agencies. We have some unfunded mandates or some service delivery needs in the constitutional officers that I wanted to discuss. So in the treasurer, we are recommending adding a position, and really it's because it's a revenue generating position. So the treasurer, Ben White, has done an amazing job actually in a very short number of time. He's made us aware of some opportunities for revenue growth without having to increase taxes and fees. Revenue growth way over and above the cost of this position, and so we would recommend that position. And then we get into some of the unfunded mandates. So in the Commissioner of the Revenue, there are several positions recommended. She's using temp services right now for some positions. We have found out that employees in these positions may not be temporary per code. They must be full-time, and so there is a cost associated with bringing them on as city employees, and so we've captured that cost in the budget. The next one for the Commissioner of the Revenue is 0.36 of an FTE. That's an unfunded mandate. This is associated with the state code requirement for application processing times for tax exemptions. Ms. Profit mentioned this to you during her presentation a few weeks ago, so we are proposing to take a part-time position, add a portion of an FTE, make it a full-time position to improve service delivery there and improve the application processing times. This is something that several of you asked about in a follow-up to that presentation from constitutional officers. In the Sheriff's Department, council knows the General Assembly added a 6th judge. So if both Sheriff and Circuit Court, for the Sheriff, it's an actual mandate. We are required to provide bailiffs for those, for the judge. So there's 2 FTEs added there. And in the Circuit Court, there's a pretty significant increase and has been a pretty significant increase in cases over time. There will be a continued increase of attorney work necessary to accommodate the 6th judge. So we are recommending 1 position for a staff attorney for the Circuit Court. Okay. So those are new adds proposed in the budget. What didn't get funded? This is the CIP slide, and again, you can see the full list in the back of the proposed CIP and the operating budget. In total, there's $205 million of unfunded requests in the CIP. You've talked already a lot about some of the unfunded public safety requests. This is just a list of a highlight of some of the other unfunded requests. Cedar Road widening is a project that we canceled a few years ago. Deep Creek Park improvements is a project that we've had to delay. It's no longer, it was fully funded at one time. And then there's some additions that we've done to that project. It's no longer fully funded in the CIP. Greenbrier Library replacement. If you remember from Chief Golisano's presentation, that fire station and library in Greenbrier share a space that's way too small for its needs. It's likely that we'll be building a combined police and fire station on that site, which means we need to relocate the library, but that remains an unfunded project, meaning we can't move forward with the combined station. So that's a project we'd like to continue to try to find a way to advance. Likewise, in the operating budget, there's $2.5 million of unfunded operating requests. This certainly isn't a list of all those requests, but you can see what some of these are. I'll draw your attention to some. Council's made amazing progress in the past few years on cybersecurity. The threats are incredible. The job the team does is incredible. We are making several, we are able to address several requests in IT, but not fully funded. But this is something I'd like to keep on the radar screen because, it's something we're going to need to continue to invest in. The other one I'll draw to your attention is, if you remember from Council's budget guiding principles, we don't supplant loss in federal and state funds. The victim witness program was grant funded, $200,000 of funding. That funding has gone away. So unless Council makes a purposeful choice to add back that $200,000, that will be $200,000 in lost revenue to the victim witness program, and they will have to adjust their operating budget and their programs and services accordingly. And with that, we will move into how we propose achieving Council's desired outcomes, and I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
All right, thank you, Chris. Mayor West, Vice Mayor Dietrich, members of council. Every year, as part of this presentation, one of the things that we like to do is talk about your 5 desired outcomes and some initiatives that are included in the proposed budget and how those initiatives align with those 5 desired outcomes. So first, in terms of economic prosperity, there's a project that's been in the CIP for a number of years. It's for the construction of a new municipal building in South Norfolk. For the FY26 proposed budget, the CIP includes an additional $3.7 million for that project to fully fund the project. This project is designed to drive some additional business and daily trips into that Poindexter Street corridor in South Norfolk, and also to alleviate some space issues that some of our city departments are experiencing. There are a number of small area plans that are either currently being developed, have been developed, or are planned to be developed in the next few years in the CIP. And the next 3 projects that you see are kind of the implementation phase of those projects. These are projects for the acquisition of property in those specific areas of the city. What we hope to do is to bring some market rate housing into those communities, and also improve some dilapidated or underutilized commercial space in those particular areas with this funding. And then in terms of incentivizing new and existing business, and also keeping with the concept of right sizing, this is one of the areas that we did that. Previously, we had kind of 3 separate programs. We had what we called a small economic development investment program, a large economic development investment program, and we had a site readiness project in the CIP. The large EDIT project and the site readiness project were both in the CIP. The small EDIT project was in the operating budget under economic development. What we've done is we've consolidated all 3 of those into one project in the CIP, and what that's going to allow us to do is to tackle the next most important thing. So we don't know if the next opportunity that walks through the door is going to be a business that exists here in Chesapeake that wants to expand, or some large employer from out of state that wants to come in and open up here in Chesapeake. So that gives us the opportunity, whatever the case may be, to incentivize or to do some site readiness work in order to bring them here to Chesapeake. In terms of connectivity, there's three kind of different components of connectivity. There's physical connectivity, there's technological connectivity, and then there's also almost community building. The first one here is placemaking and making sure that there is a sense of place. Chesapeake has a number of unique communities within the city, and we've included some funding for some enhanced signage and landscaping at entrances and gateways to the city, so that when people enter the city of Chesapeake, they know that they've done so. The next several projects there are for pedestrian improvements. Specifically, there's 2 new sidewalk projects within the CIP. Both of those projects are in the vicinity of schools in Great Bridge and Western Branch. What this will do is allow students as well as individuals that live in those areas greater access to these pedestrian sidewalks, and also improve the safety in those particular areas by creating that connectivity where it doesn't exist presently. Then there's also a pedestrian access improvements project. This is fully VDOT funded. And what this project will do is it's going to fund improvements at 33 signalized intersections on Military Highway, Portsmouth Boulevard, and Battlefield Boulevard. So again, while all 3 of these projects are shown in the connectivity section of this, we could also easily put them in the safety and security section because they are kind of accomplishing both of those things. And then in terms of technological connectivity, this is the first year of the operating budget impacts for the new tax system modernization project. That project has been in the CIP for a number of years. In FY26, we will implement the first phase. It's about $530,000, and what this will do, this system is going to not only improve the technology that we're utilizing, but also update our business processes so that when taxpayers and citizens interact with the Commissioner of the Revenue and the Treasurer's Office, hopefully we will improve that experience with that new system and with those new business processes. In terms of cultural diversity, we are adding a new business development representative in the Economic Development Department. And also in our procurement office, we are continuing our e-bidding software and also utilizing DocuSign. And what we're trying to do here is we have a number of small businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and veteran-owned businesses, and we're trying to remove any barriers that may exist to them entering into this market and trying to conduct business or win business from the city. So anytime that we can reduce the cost or reduce any barriers to them being able to bid on city work, we attempt to do so. Something that I'm looking forward to is toward the end of fiscal year 26, beginning of fiscal year 27, America's actually going to turn 250 years old. God willing, we make it. And one of the things that the Parks, Rec, and Tourism Department is doing is they are hosting Sail 2026 Virginia at Battlefield Park. And what this will include is a number of historic replica ships that will come to Battlefield Park. Visitors will be able to tour those ships and learn more about the history of Chesapeake and its part in the founding of our nation. And then also, Chris mentioned this earlier, the Great Bridge Battlefield and Waterways Museum. We've increased the contribution, as Chris mentioned. The new operating agreement and sublease that we have, this will provide some additional funding to allow them to continue their programming and enhance some of their programming in an effort to draw more visitors to that facility. In terms of environmental responsibility, there was a project that was added in the CIP back in 2023. It is a rural roads crossing upgrade project. We've added some additional funding to that project for FY26. What this project does is it goes in on rural roadways, and there are culverts or pipes that run under these roads that have either degraded or they're undersized. And what this allows us to do is go in and replace those pipes, make them the correct size. The problem that you run into is when they are not properly sized or they have deteriorated, the water will back up, it cannot flow, and it will sit on those agricultural properties. We will have erosion, or you potentially would have the loss or damage to crops. So this allows us to go in and right-size those pipes and make sure that the water can move in the way it's intended to. Also, related to environmental responsibility, we have a new project for an urban forestry and tree inventory. This is going to allow us to inventory all the trees that we have on city property, parks, any city facilities that we have. Obviously, trees provide a number of benefits. They reduce pollution. They can also help with stormwater mitigation. And also in terms of shade, to try to avoid some of those heat islands that can occur. So this project is funded and will create that inventory. Next, we have a number of properties that have been acquired by FEMA. These are properties that have experienced severe repetitive loss. They are flooded. They've flooded several times, so FEMA goes in and acquires those properties. Then they turn them over to us, and what we would do with them is we would turn them into passive recreational properties to provide recreational opportunities for residents that live in those areas of the city, or anyone that wanted to visit one of those sites. And then we also have some funding in Public Works for enhanced mowing frequencies. I was cautioned earlier to make sure I say this is on certain medians. This will not be all medians in the city, but this will increase the number of cycles in the main growing season from June through September. And again, on certain medians within the city that we've noticed some new invasive species, which is really causing the grass to grow very quickly. This will increase the number of mowing cycles for those medians. Moving on to safety and security, I want to touch first on the core budget, and then I'll talk a little bit about enhanced public safety and our proposed package there. And the chiefs talked about this last week, so I won't belabor this too much. But the first thing is in the core budget, we have added those 12 additional firefighters in an effort to close that gap on the minimum staffing that the chief discussed last week. Something else we're doing is we're expanding storage capacity for evidence, and this is a technology-related project. This is specifically geared toward the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. These are very large files and have very long retention requirements, so we need to expand the storage. This storage will be restricted to only certain individuals that need to have access to this information. So that is something that's funded within the core budget. We're also moving the Tyler New World system to the cloud. This is a platform that is utilized by all three of our public safety agencies, police, fire, and the sheriff's office. And what this will do by moving it to the cloud is it's going to improve system functionality as well as reduce the amount of downtime that occurs when the system has to be maintained or patched. And then we also have some funding for some replacement equipment that's used by our first responders. This is for the LGuard system. This is a system that is a device-assisted CPR technique that has been demonstrated to improve survivability rates when someone suffers a cardiac arrest event. So we've added funding in the CIP to fund the replacement of this equipment. And then moving to enhanced public safety. In terms of safety and security, we're looking to improve emergency response times with the 24 new firefighter positions that the chief discussed last week. That would be for the staffing of Rescue 15 as well as Medic 11. In terms of providing a safer work environment, the chief discussed the second set of turnout gear. He mentioned that about half of the staff have been issued the second set, but not everyone has a second set. As the firefighters enter and work to fight those fires, many times their turnout gear gets inundated with carcinogens and other toxic chemicals. If they don't have this second set, they have to continue to wear that gear through the remainder of their shift. But if we provide them that second set of gear, that would allow them to remove the contaminated gear and put on this second set and then continue their shift. And then in terms of the replacement fire stations, 4 and 14 in the 5th Police Precinct, the chief discussed some of the space issues, but he also discussed some of the ventilation issues at the 2 fire stations and how sometimes some of those diesel fumes from the apparatus bays can get into the living quarters, and that's certainly something that we want to avoid. So by replacing those stations, we can modernize those HVAC systems, address some of those space issues, and improve the work environment of the staff that are assigned to those facilities. We also are adding 5 additional personnel at Animal Services. This is designed to improve the outcomes for the animals, try to reduce the number of euthanizations that have to occur, but also enhance customer service and allow the individuals that are working at that facility to perform the work that they must do to clean up after the animals more often. And then finally, we're adding a data analyst position in the fire department. This position will use data and analytics and work with the fire department staff to ensure that we are using data-informed decision-making in the allocation of resources. So now that we've talked about your 5 desired outcomes and some of the initiatives that are aligned with those, we get into the really exciting part of the presentation, and we'll talk about some of the numbers. So first, we want to start at a global level and talk to you about the FY26 net operating budget. This is the total budget, city and schools. It totals about $1.65 billion for FY26. 47% of that roughly is on the school side, and 52.8% of that is on the city side. What you also see on this graph is that on the school side, their budget is decreasing by 1.4% from FY25, while the city budget is increasing by 3.1%. So in a couple of slides, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why that's occurring on the school side. But before we do that, let's talk about the city side and what's driving some of that expenditure or that 3.1% increase. Chris mentioned earlier our pay competitiveness initiatives, and that's certainly driving part of that. That's about $11 million between salary increases for public safety, the general workforce, and the benefit costs associated with those increases. I mentioned earlier the operating budget impacts from the tax modernization project, but we also have some initial staffing that we're adding halfway through the year for the Cuffey Pool. While the pool is still a ways away, we're adding 2 positions within Parks, Rec, and Tourism, and what they'll do is start some of the initial planning for programming at that facility when it does open. I would note on both of these, there will probably be additional funding requests coming in FY27 as we move closer, or we implement additional phases of the tax system modernization project, and we move closer to the opening of the Cuffey Pool facility. Also, and we've talked about this, there's a number of new positions being added, especially in the enhanced public safety proposal, and that they are certainly driving some of this cost. And then we also have some expenditures that are actually driven by our increases in revenue. So what are those? Those are the transfer to the schools through the revenue sharing formula. As revenues increase, we share those revenues. So obviously the transfer to the schools must increase correspondingly. And then the 12% policy reserve, which we'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later in the presentation. That is basically 12% of every new, or every increased dollar that we receive in the general fund must first go into the policy reserve, and that's a city council policy that was amended back in 2023. So I said a moment ago that the school's operating budget is actually declining. So what's driving that decrease? Well, if you'll notice on this slide, the school has a number of funds within their operating budget. But in FY26, there are 3 funds that are decreasing. And not only are they decreasing, but all 3 of these funds are decreasing by more than 30%. So the one that is driving this decrease in the school's budget the most is the school grant fund. What this slide shows is the decline in federal and state grants from FY25 to FY26. On the left-hand side of the slide, you see federal grants, which are declining by over $24 million. And on the right-hand side, you see state grants, which are declining by just over $5 million. So just within that one fund, between those 2 sources, that's a loss of $30 million in grant revenue, which is really what's driving that decrease. But what is not decreasing is the city's contribution to the schools. Like I said, we share revenue with the schools through the revenue sharing formula. And as you can see on this slide, our contribution to the schools has grown over the last several years. In FY26, we are estimating that at $290.1 million, which is a 3% increase from the FY25 adopted budget. I would also note here that that does not include the $35.3 million that we provide to the schools in the school lockbox. So that is not shown on this particular slide, but that's an additional $35 million. So while we talked about the school operating budget overall declining, I wanted to show all of you the 2 main operating funds in the city and for the schools, and that's the city's general fund and the school operating fund. So if you look just at those 2 funds, those 2 funds are actually increasing by about the same rate, both growing by about 4%. So this is really, in my mind, a better barometer of what's actually going on. A lot of the grant funding they're losing is stimulus funding that had been provided and they've now fully expended. So what's been added in the school budget and what's driving that 3.9% increase in their operating fund? Similar to the city, they have 3% compensation increase included in their superintendent's budget for teachers and employees on their unified scale. They're also doing some reclassifications and market adjustments for some of their technical positions, their HVAC positions, as well as some of the instructors at the Chesapeake Career Center are receiving market adjustments to bring them closer in line with the experience that they have in their particular fields. They're also increasing staffing. They have a number of new positions that are being added based on SOQ requirements. And then as part of the reduction in those grant revenues, they're moving several positions that were previously funded by those grants over into their operating fund. So those are really, while they're coming out of the grant fund, they are increasing the school operating fund and the cost to that fund. And then they also have a couple of other funds that are increasing. Their self-insurance fund is increasing by about $2.1 million. Their nutrition fund is increasing $5.8 million, and their textbook fund is also increasing. So now if we pivot over to just the city and look at operating expenditures by category, I'll be no big surprise on this slide. The vast majority, or the largest category of expenditures on the city side is personnel. It's at 46.5%. The second largest category of expenditures is general expenditures. And then the smallest category at 1.1% is capital outlay. So this is a slide that, or a graphic that we've been showing for a couple of years. And what this graphic does is it shows how a dollar in the general fund is budgeted or ultimately expended. And this excludes discretionary funding. So when I say excludes discretionary funding, this does not include the policy reserve that's been taken out of this. And it also excludes any debt service that we may have to pay. And what this slide shows is that between the contribution to the schools and our public safety departments, that about 70% of every dollar that we expend out of the general fund goes to either public safety or our contribution to the schools. But new this year, we wanted to show you what this looked like if we removed the contribution to the schools and just looked at it from the city department perspective. And what you'll notice is that public safety makes up just over half of every dollar that we expend out of the general fund. Last year, that was 49.9%. So for FY26, we've now moved to over half of every dollar out of the general fund is expended on public safety. Moving to revenue. And again, we'll start at the global level. When looking at city and schools, all funds, I kind of highlight two things here. First, you'll notice that our largest source of revenue is state revenue at 32.9%. What I would point out is a lot of this revenue goes to the school system. It's not on the city side. I'll show you on the city side what that looks like here in just a few slides. And then the second largest source of revenue is the general property tax. That is your real estate tax and your personal property tax. And that makes up about 31.9% of the total revenue for city and schools. As Chris mentioned earlier, we've had tremendous stability in the tax rate going back to 2005 and the run-up in housing assessments prior to the Great Recession. City Council at that time reduced the real estate tax rate all the way down from $1.28 to $1.05. The rate remained at $1.05 all the way until FY23 when City Council dropped it to $1.01, and it has remained at that rate for the past several fiscal years. And this year we are proposing that 2-cent increase. We built the core budget at $1.01, but we also have the proposed 2-cent increase for enhanced public safety. So we did want to talk about just very briefly what the impact of that 2-cent increase would be on the taxpayer. So if you take the average residential assessment here in the city of Chesapeake and you apply that 2-cent increase, that's going to equate to about $6.60 each month. So that's the increase to the taxpayer on that average residential assessment, $6.60 per month. Looking at our budget for real estate tax revenue, again, this is looking at all funds. As you can see, real estate tax revenue growth has been strong for FY26 with the 2-cent proposed increase. The total would be $415.8 million. Again, that's across all funds. That's a 6.5% increase from the adopted 25 budget. And our growth in real estate this year is particularly important because we have a number of other revenue sources that over the past several years since I've been budget director have really been significant. They've grown, and it's really given us an opportunity to fund some initiatives with the growth in those revenues, and the growth has slowed down, and we'll show you what that looks like here in just a few slides. But real estate growth is certainly important this year, even at the $1 rate. First, want to look at the dedications of the real estate tax. This one does exclude mosquito control and the penny that goes to mosquito control. And what I would highlight on this slide is the new enhanced public safety dedication, and that would equate to about $7.5 million. Now looking at some of those revenue sources that I just mentioned that previously were growing and now are really slowing down or even declining. First is personal property tax revenue. This tax is, and I've said this before and you'll hear me say it again, personal property tax is by far the most difficult revenue for us to project. The vehicle market is very volatile. As all of you will recall, during the pandemic, there was a shortage of microchips, microprocessors, and there was really a shortage of vehicles. That really pushed the used vehicle market up, assessments went up, and revenue kind of corresponded with those assessments. However, in fiscal year '23, City Council, due to the level of assessments, actually brought those assessments down by 22.5% to try to mitigate some of that increase in assessments. So for FY26, we're estimating about $75.9 million from this source, which is a decline of 0.2% from FY25. Relatively similar story on general sales tax revenue. As you can see, if you look at fiscal year '22 and fiscal year '24, that's about a $10 million increase in the budget from fiscal year '22 to fiscal year '24. During the pandemic, we really didn't know what would happen with consumer activity. Some of us felt that consumer activity would really slow down, but there was a lot of inflation in the economy, and with this being a percentage-based tax, as those prices increase for goods, the sales tax revenue also increases. So we were really chasing this revenue for a number of years. Well, the good news is we've caught it, but the not so good news is that for FY26, we are actually projecting a decrease. Now, this is a budget-to-budget decrease. While actual revenue collections continue to grow, we're not sure that we're going to achieve that $60.6 million estimate in FY25, and for that reason, we've reduced that estimate in fiscal year '26. So we're projecting a 1.3% decrease in general sales tax revenue. Restaurant meal tax revenue. I won't give you the same story I just gave you on the last two slides, but the story is very similar. What I would point out here is back in 2023, as Chris mentioned, when we were talking about option 2 earlier, there was a 0.5% rate increase. But again, this revenue had strong growth even during the pandemic. Some of this was driven by inflation, and now that the economy seems to be stabilizing, some of those inflationary forces are no longer impacting this revenue. And again, with this revenue, we're only projecting about a 0.3% increase. So all of those revenues over the past several years had been really growing at high levels, and we've seen that really level off. So I mentioned earlier looking at the entire budget, both city and schools. Now we're looking at just the city general fund and looking at revenue. And here what you'll see is general property taxes, the real estate tax and personal property make up about 56.5% of the total revenue to the general fund. But if you drop down 2 and you now look at state revenue, remember on that earlier slide, that was over $500 million when looking at both the city and the schools. Now when we're looking at the general fund and looking at state revenue, that's $113 million. And the main sources of that are VDOT maintenance funding that goes to public works for schools, as well as reimbursement from the comp board for our constitutional offices. Toggling over to the school operating fund and looking at revenue by source for that fund, what you'll notice here is about 43.4% of their revenue for that fund comes from the revenue sharing formula contribution, 46.6% comes from the state, and if you put those two together, that's 90% of that fund comes from either the state or the city's contribution through the revenue sharing formula. Looking at the other school funds and the revenue by source, the highlights really here are that local sources are the largest category of revenue to their other funds, followed by federal revenue. The federal revenue is really within that grants fund as well as the school nutrition fund. Those are the two funds that receive the vast majority of the federal revenue that the schools receive. Moving quickly to the CIP. First, we wanted to show you a breakdown of the CIP by section with one exception. And I would note that this includes not only the 5-year program, but also previously appropriated funds. And what you'll see on this slide is we've called out the Public Safety Training Academy, while the rest of the slide is showing each individual section. As this is City Council's highest priority project, we wanted to call it out separately, and that project by itself makes up about 6.7% of the total program. Another large proportion of the program is transportation at over 20%. And then we also like to look at how the CIP is divided in terms of spending for City Council's desired outcomes and the strategic anchors. And I think it's no surprise here that the largest proportion is shown there in the box at 27% that goes to safety and security. Connectivity also receives over a quarter of the total program. That involves a lot of the roadway projects as well as a lot of our IT projects. And then environmental responsibility also receives over a fifth of the funding to the capital program. So looking at the sources of funding to the CIP, the largest individual source are general obligation bonds. We use bonds to finance projects like the Public Safety Training Academy, the 2 replacement stations, and the replacement of the 5th police precinct that are included in enhanced public safety would be funded with bonds. So that is the largest individual source. However, we did want to point you all and highlight the high priority one-time account. We've had some conversations in the past about savings and the money that falls to the bottom line at the end of the fiscal year and what happens to that money. Well, what we do with that funding, and Chris talked about this last week, is we really use that the following years to fund capital projects. Not every capital project can be bond funded. There are certain parameters that the project has to meet in order for it to be bond funded. So for us to have a well-rounded and balanced capital program, we do need cash in order to fund a number of projects that don't qualify for the use of bonds. And the main source that we utilize is the high priority one-time account. So as you can see, over the 5-year program, we're programming about $121 million from that account. And in total, we're using about $178.8 million in one-time funds. So this is the high priority one-time account, as well as fund balance from some other funds. We're using fund balance from some special revenue funds, some of the TIF funds, and some of our utility funds. So there's $178 million of one-time funding included in the 5-year program. So did want to talk a little more about the high priority one-time account and look at the balance to begin each fiscal year. What you'll notice on this particular slide is since the inception of this fund or this account back in 2015, the account was growing every single year. And then you'll notice that in at the end of FY24 and the beginning of fiscal year 25, that's the first year that the high priority one-time account actually declined year over year. While the balance is still healthy, it was the first decline we've seen in this account since the account began. So first, we wanted to start off talking about what drove that growth in the one-time account. Well, the first thing that drove the growth, and I'm going to toggle back to that slide very quickly, and you'll notice that from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24, that was the most significant increase in that account. And this goes back to something that we were discussing earlier, and that was the elimination of the 6% charter reserve requirement, and that added $41 million to this account. Now, please remember, this didn't add any money to the city's coffers. This $41 million was in that charter reserve that we were required to have. We were the only jurisdiction in the entire state that had this emergency reserve requirement. And City Council at that time went to the state legislature and asked that we have that requirement eliminated from the charter. The state legislature agreed, and at that time, the $41 million was removed from the charter reserve and then placed in the high priority one-time account. So that explains that growth that occurred from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24. The other thing that's occurred over the past several years, and I touched on this earlier, is the extremely conservative revenue estimates that we were making during the pandemic, and even coming out of the pandemic. We really didn't know what was going to happen economically. Would the economy shut down? So we were very conservative in our revenue estimates. But what didn't happen was the economy really didn't shut down, and we did experience significant inflation. So some of those revenue sources that we anticipated, or at least we projected minimal growth in, or even declines, those didn't materialize. So that over-realized revenue fell to the high priority one-time account. And then more recently, the change in interest rates. Everyone will recall several years ago, interest rates were historically low. And we saw folks bidding up houses because interest rates were so low. Well, that had some impacts. Our interest income and some of our investment earnings were extremely low. I think back in fiscal year 22 in the general fund, we actually received less than $1 million of interest income in the general fund. Well, in fiscal year 24, we actually received about $18 million of interest income. And this is a really volatile, as hopefully that demonstrates, it's a really volatile and unreliable revenue source that we would not recommend building or backing ongoing expenses with a revenue source that's so volatile. Now, we have increased our interest income estimate in the budget, but certainly not to that level because we just don't know what interest rates are going to do in the future. So also wanted to show you this, and what this slide does is it shows you the difference, or it's the general government revenues that are projected by my department. So we have over 40 revenues that my office projects on an annual basis. It's over $600 million in revenue. And in fiscal year 24, the most recent year that just ended, we realized $36.4 million of revenue over budget. Well, you may say, well, Jonathan, that's not very good. That's about 5.28% of over-realized revenue when compared to budget. But what I would share with you is that if you take away just 3 sources of revenue, and some of these I've already mentioned, the first being interest income, and then I told you that personal property was the most difficult revenue to project. The only thing more difficult to project than personal property is delinquent personal property, as we don't know when taxpayers are going to come in and bring their tax accounts current. And then business license taxes. If you take away just those 3 revenues and what we over-realized in those 3 sources, that number drops all the way down to $170,000. So those 3 sources really made up the vast majority of that $36.4 million of over-realized revenue. I would also point out that the Commissioner of the Revenue shared with us that some of that revenue that we received in business license was also delinquent taxpayers bringing their accounts current in fiscal year 24. So this slide shows the anticipated drawdown based on the CIP program over the next 5 years. Now, one thing this slide does assume is that we will not add to this account. That's probably an unrealistic assumption, but the most conservative assumption is that over the next 5 years, that if all goes according to plan within the CIP, that we would draw that account down to just over $29 million in fiscal year 2030. So this is my last section of the presentation, but one of the things that we really wanted to talk to you about this year and key on is right sizing, and Chris has talked about this a little bit, but we're going to talk more specifically about some of the things that we feel as though we're right sizing in this budget. Well, the first major step in right-sizing is something I've already mentioned. This is something that council did a couple of years ago, and that was to approach the state legislature and ask that 6% charter reserve requirement be eliminated. And at that time, City Council also revised the fund balance policy and brought the policy down to 12%, where before that, we were having to contribute 18% of all additional revenue into either the policy reserve or that charter reserve. Now, we're only contributing 12%. So we saw that as kind of the first step in right-sizing the budget. So what we do in my office every year is we go through an annual review of both funds and dedications, and we have a number of criteria that we use when we're doing this review. And based on our review for fiscal year 26, we identified 3 funds that we felt had some potential for some right-sizing. So the first fund that we identified was the Conference Center Special Revenue Fund. And what this slide shows is the growth in the fund balance of this fund over the last 5 fiscal years. And what you'll notice is that the fund balance over the past 5 years in this fund has doubled. We actually identified this fund last year and started programming some of this fund balance within the capital program, but this year we're actually proposing to take this a step further. So what we are proposing is to reallocate, and Chris mentioned this earlier, 0.5% from the meals tax dedication that currently goes to the Conference Center Special Revenue Fund and reallocate that to the city lot box. When City Council approved the Public Safety Training Academy and we financed that project using bonds, it really drew down a lot of the capacity within the lot box to fund additional large-scale capital projects, public safety facility replacement, other facility replacements. So we felt like this was a good opportunity to redirect that $3.7 million and create some additional capacity within the city lot box. So that would draw down that fund annually by about $3.7 million. So in order to replace a portion of that funding, what we are recommending is the $1 increase in the lodging flat tax that Chris discussed earlier be dedicated to the Conference Center Special Revenue Fund and replace a portion of that $3.7 million. The next fund that we identified for right-sizing was the Health Insurance Internal Service Fund. So insurance is another one of those tricky expenditures, and the reason that it's tricky is because our health insurance runs on a calendar year, and the budget obviously runs on a fiscal year. So we are presently budgeting for plan year 2026 in the fiscal year 26 budget. But plan year 26 won't start until January, and we won't start looking at rates until later this fall. We really don't know what insurance rates are going to do over the next several months. And it's, they're kind of highly unpredictable. They've been stable in the last few years, but they are unpredictable historically. So one of the things that we've done each year since I've been the budget director is we have about a $2.5 million, it's run between $2 and $2.6 million reserve that we put in the general fund in case we do have rate increases for health insurance. But due to the size of the growth in the fund balance in this particular fund, we've actually moved that reserve out of the general fund this year and moved it over to the health insurance fund. So what did that do? That freed up $2.5 million of capacity in the general fund and allowed us to fund some things within the core budget. Had we not made that change, we may not have been able to include in the city manager's proposed budget. And you'll see just a few examples of some items there. The fire minimum staffing, the general wage increase of the public safety step. So again, this was an important step in right-sizing this fund and moving that reserve over to that fund and creating that capacity. And then the last fund that we identified was the Mosquito Control Fund. Again, starting with the fund balance, and on this slide, we're looking at not only the total fund balance for the fund, but also the available fund balance. As you can see, for the most recently ended fiscal year, the fund balance here is about $11.4 million. But if you look at the actual revenue to the fund and actual expenditures, so a lot of the slides we've looked at previously are looking at budget. This is actually looking at actuals. And if you look at the actuals in the mosquito control fund, what you'll notice are the expenditures, which are in the gray bars, really only deviate or go from about $4 million, which happened in fiscal year 22 and 23, up to $4.3 million in the most recent fiscal year 24. But what you'll also notice is that revenue to this fund has grown from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 24 by $2.1 million. So while the expenses of this fund are relatively stable, the revenue within this fund is growing. Now, I failed to mention this, so let me do it now. This fund has two main revenue sources: a 1 cent citywide dedication of the real estate tax and an 8 cent dedication of the personal property tax. So this slide is basically what we're doing is we're removing the 8 cent of the personal property tax that goes to this fund and just looking at those actual expenditures that you just saw and comparing them to just the revenue realized from the real estate tax. And what you'll notice is that as you move to the right and go from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 24, those lines move together. And in fiscal year 24, the difference between the total expenses of the fund and the revenue just from the 1 cent of the real estate tax was a difference of about $500,000. So I think Chris is going to touch on this fund a little more in just a moment. And thankfully, my last slide, because I've almost emptied this water. We continue with our transparency initiatives this year. Open Book is something that we rolled out a couple of years ago, and we continue to evolve this tool, but it allows anyone to go and search online for the budget. It has the capital program. You can see a map of the capital program and where the projects are. You can look at the operating budget, revenues, expenditures, and position complements of departments, and you can drill down several layers deep, even more deep, more granular than you can see in the actual budget documents. We encourage people to go out and check that out. And with that, I will turn it back over to the city manager.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I want to close things out by setting the stage for your next work session. So as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to maintain high levels of citizen satisfaction, maintain the lowest tax and fee burden in the region, and then address those unfunded public safety needs. And that's really going to be the focus of your April 8th work session. This is just a recap of the needs that are currently unfunded and what we're able to address in the core budget, what we're able to address in what we're calling the enhanced public safety budget, and then future unfunded needs even beyond that. If you recall from last week, the Vice Mayor asked that we, in all of these categories, that we prioritize which are the most important from the perspective of the Public Safety Agency, so we'll be bringing you that information to begin the next work session. But one of the slides I wanted to leave you with is obviously a lot of the attention on the budget so far is on the proposed real estate tax increase. If you remember from where I began the presentation, if we didn't advertise an increase, it would take the ability from council away to even consider it. So just like in previous years, I'm quite sure that you'll look for opportunities to drive that number down and try to fund the core priorities. So I just wanted to give you some examples of options that we could use to address the unfunded public safety needs. So obviously we are advertising an increase in the real estate tax of 2 cents. If we also chose to maintain the existing personal property tax rate, as Jonathan mentioned, there's capacity to redirect some funds from mosquito control to enhance public safety. So if we were to do option A, that would generate $10 million a year, and that would address everything from the core budget, the enhanced public safety budget, and start to make some progress on those future unfunded public safety needs. Option B, increase the real estate tax rate 2 cents, and actually reduce the personal property tax rate by 8 cents. So if we were to do that, and of course the personal property tax, why we chose a reduction there is it appears to be the most hated tax. That's the tax that people talk to us about the most during the course of the year. If we reduced it by 8 cents, we would then be tied with the beach for the lowest personal property tax rate in the region, and that option would generate $7.4 million a year for enhanced public safety, which would allow us to do everything in the core budget and everything in the enhanced public safety budget. Option C, maintain both the existing real estate tax and the existing personal property tax, but redirect 8 cents from mosquito control to enhanced public safety. So no change in tax rates, but just redirecting those 8 cents from mosquito control to public safety. That would generate $2.5 million a year for enhanced public safety. We could, at a minimum, start to address what's in the core budget. We would probably need to move to cost reductions to start making headway on the enhanced public safety. And then the last option, as always, you could choose any of those or some combination of revenue increase and cuts to programs and services. And so I'm mindful of the fact that it's a very big budget, and so there are opportunities to identify priorities and make those policy choices. So I know it's been sort of widely reported about the increase in the tax rate, but I just want people to rest assured that we'll help council find which levels of enhanced public safety that you would like to consider, and then we'll bring you an opportunity to fund those through some combination of revenue or reductions of programs and services. I think back through the budget we just proposed. During the council retreat, you asked us to identify ways to improve environmental responsibility. We talked particularly about tree canopy, invasive species, and some other things. So you'll see some initiatives that we've proposed there, but at the end of the day, you might decide that those initiatives aren't as important as some of the public safety initiatives, right? So we've given you the capacity to make those choices, and then over the coming work sessions, we will help you in the community have those conversations to, at the end of the day, be to be able to address some of those unfunded public safety needs and still maintain our high quality of life and lowest taxes and fees within the region. Upcoming steps in the budget process, we have 3 work sessions planned for April. The April 8th will really specifically focus on the enhanced public safety and what resources it will take to address each of the public safety agency priorities. We also have work sessions on the 15th and the 22nd. Do want to mention some issues on the horizon. Clearly, enhanced public safety is top of mind. I mentioned earlier we also have aging utility infrastructure. We'll be bringing you some information about that. We talked a few weeks ago about solid waste management and what the future holds there. Hampton Roads Transit will be coming to talk to you within the next couple months about the results of their transit study. And then we have new economic development opportunities on the horizon. I've seen a lot in the community, some discussions about data centers. We do have some data centers tracking in our community. We are going to bring you a tax proposal to make sure that we're doing right by the community, and so we're attracting the industry, but also realizing future revenues, which could also help offset the need for additional revenue from real estate and personal property. So this is really just the beginning of that conversation. We want to help council and the community make choices, address needs, and pursue opportunities in the future. So closing thoughts, your upcoming work sessions, we're going to address public safety. We're going to make some recommendations to modify the budget ordinance. You asked several questions about constitutional officers a few weeks ago. We'll be bringing you the answers to those questions. Some additional right sizing on your various commissions and authorities, answers to questions about tax exemption information and some of the impacts. I mentioned water and sewer issues, and then any other topics that council identifies that you'd like additional information on, we'd be happy to provide. To make sure we're transparent, we'll be providing the video of this to the community tomorrow. Here's a link to where these budget documents can be found, and all of it is easily searchable available on the links provided there. And I want to close where I began. Thank you so much to the budget team. They did an amazing amount of work in a short period of time. Normally, we'd ask council for your priorities in the fall. Because this is a new council, we waited till January so you could all identify those priorities. But they've been really hard at work to make sure that we're addressing those priorities and helping council and the community make choices. So thank you all to the team. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. We certainly do appreciate all of this information. There's a lot for us to digest, and hopefully at our next work session, we'll have a chance to talk more about it. So, council meeting will begin, regular council meeting will begin at 6:30. Thank you.